رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum, brothers, sisters, and everybody else who's joined us. Welcome to what we hope is going to be a series of discussions based on our Ramadan reminders, which started yesterday. So what we were hoping to do is to carry on that discussion from the previous day and try and bring in a perspective from our younger generation. So, however, please don't think it's only based on them and their views. I'm hoping that what comes out of this is an experience that a lot of people have gone through, which we have when we were youth and when we were young and growing up, so we can understand their perspective and specifically on Ramadan and how it impacts them. Now, what we discussed and what we'd like to do is to take upon what were the key points from yesterday's reminder and get a younger generation view of those reminders and how it impacts them and any kind of difficulty they have practicing, implementing, or bringing about the changes necessary that were suggested or help them not just during Ramadan, but hopefully coming out of Ramadan, because the aim of Ramadan is to become a better person and then continue it post Ramadan as well. It's not just you come, you stop doing something what you perceive as bad, and then get on with it as soon as Eid is over. So to help me in that aim, brave enough to join me is Misbah, who will be representing the youth. Assalamu alaikum, Misbah.
Walaikum salam, Uncle Harun.
And hopefully she'll be able to bring what I think is a perspective of the younger generation. She's a young university student with broad knowledge, I would say, up and coming budding lawyer. So hopefully some good views and some good discussion could be had.
Inshallah.
I'm hoping that other people will have input as well, and as much of the younger generation as we can. Any questions that you have, any queries that you have, I'm hoping the brothers that are on will monitor the chat. So if you want a specific question on something that we've discussed, please feel free to put it on the chat, and one of the brothers will pick it up and maybe try and bring it in. And based on the discussion I have with Misbah, I'm hoping that the brothers that are there, who are much more learned than I am, will be able to give them, you, Misbah, the youth, and even all of us, a perspective of what they think can help us to make Ramadan better for us. Any tips, any kind of improvements and that kind of thing. So let's just kind of crack on. Based on Ramadan, we're here to attain Allah's pleasure. Best time of all the months to try and do this. And Brother Asim left us with a few key points from yesterday's talk, which hopefully we carry with us. Some of which were one of which was reflection, as in take time to reflect, be consistent. Very, very important message. Just be. If you can do 5 minutes of something and do it every day, then do that. If it's 10 minutes, if it's one page, if it's whatever it is, be consistent. Allah Ta'ala loves consistency. Build your relationship with the Quran. Focus on Salah. I mean, two of the things that we say we pray, we should do that anyway. However, the Quran, just making time to do that or listen to that is probably one of the difficult things I think that we do generally, yet we find time for everything else. Another one, great one, be selfish, right? If you're going to do anything, be selfish in this month and ask for anything and everything that you think you want and need to be successful. But even what do you ask for? We'll come on to that. What can you ask for? What should you be asking for, right? You can't, there's not anything in it, I want £1 million. It's not going to work like that. The other thing is to try and remove the obstacles. And the key one for me, I think I'd like to discuss with you is these obstacles. What are these obstacles you, me, and but specifically the youth face, I think, in trying to focus on Ramadan or even the lead up to it during Ramadan and then coming out the other end? What are those obstacles that make it difficult for us to do that and achieve it? We've had Ramadan, or we're in Ramadan now. We're lucky, we're blessed. Who's to say we're not going to experience the next Ramadan? So we really need to take advantage of that now. Try and understand those obstacles, and if we can, rectify this Ramadan. Use this Ramadan as a way to remove those obstacles and make use of that special relationship that we're going to have with Allah Ta'ala, where all the rewards, the value of them is increased. You're not going to get this, it's like a club card and double points. You're not going to get this chance again. So coming over to you, Misbah, from someone who's gone through school, who's at university, who's worked, who's been, who has been out there, who does the things every adult teenager does. What for you are some of the obstacles that you think you face during Ramadan, but doesn't necessarily just have to be Ramadan, but those kind of principles we talked about, reflection, focusing on salah, being consistent, building a relationship with the Quran, that prevents you from really being able to hone in on those things and be a better person, I would say.
I think when I thought about this question, the first thing that came to my mind was music. As Ramadan started, obviously I've started to cut down on my music and kind of eradicate it throughout Ramadan. And I've seen a huge difference. I think before, when listening to music, we don't understand the kind of effects that it has on us because it's become so mainstream in the younger generation. It's just a staple in how we live. When we're driving, when we're working, when we're traveling, even anything that we're doing, there's always music in the background. And I think, as I've seen from my friends and like other people that are my age, it's kind of a common theme. Now, as Ramadan started and I've kind of trying to been focused on my prayers and focus more on my Quran, cutting out music has been quite difficult, to say the least. But I can see my focus has just soared, like it's gone through the roof. And I never really understood the effects of music before I cut it out. And now I can understand why some people deem it as haram, and kind of the messages and the kind of brainwashing you're putting yourself through by listening to hours upon hours of the wrong message. You're kind of feeding your heart and your soul. And even though we may not implement this message, it's still in our brain and it's still sitting in our heads. And even we're subconsciously absorbing it. So when we're praying, for example, we're constantly thinking about other things, and those things may not necessarily be good for our iman and our soul. So I think definitely music has been one of the biggest struggles. And I think Ramadan is all about implementing changes that are going to last. So if I'm going to try and eradicate music, which is something that I will find extremely difficult myself, and I think others would too, I think it's more about controlling what you're listening to and the amount you're listening to, and kind of putting limits on yourself and kind of prioritizing what is more important. So instead of listening to music while I'm working or while I'm driving, I will listen to a podcast instead, an Islamic podcast, and I'll feed my mind and my soul with knowledge instead of messages that are necessarily not good for me. I think, yeah, sorry, Karen.
I was going to say, so would you agree then that there's listening to music like a background noise, right? You're working, you're studying. I don't have an issue with that. I listen to music. Most of the people here at a young age listen to music. It's when it kind of manifests itself into what you want to become, or it starts having an impact on you as an individual. You start dressing like these people. You becoming like you want to become one of them. That's where I think it has an issue. But in terms of Ramadan and changing it for, say, a podcast, there's also nasheeds, right, that people can listen to. Now, do you think it's good to say, well, I'll tell you what, don't listen to music, but you're okay listening to nasheeds? It's almost like would not listening to music at all be beneficial, and focus on something different, like reading Quran, or trying to spend a bit more time with that? I mean, what do you think of that?
I think when it comes to nasheeds, I don't think they're bad at all. I don't think there's anything wrong with them. They provide a positive message. They're still, putting good things into our minds. But practically, to translate that into kind of the younger generation, I don't think nasheeds will replace how we listen to music, mainstream music. I don't think it's like telling a smoker who's been smoking for 10 years to suddenly stop smoking and instead vape twice a day instead. Like, it's not going to be something that lasts, I think, because it doesn't give the same effects, which isn't a good thing. It's not a good thing. The effects that we're getting from music aren't going to be the same effects that we're getting from nasheeds. So instead of trying to replace, I think the way to go about it is to understand what you're listening to, what that represents, and what message that's putting into your head. Even if you're not necessarily implementing it, just know that is going on in your brain. And you can see the youth around us, kind of how especially in the UK, the music has changed to UK culture. For example, drill is all about drugs and stabbing people and things like that. We might not be implementing that, we might not be doing that, but we can see people around us that are, and it's becoming more and more common, and it's becoming more and more normalized. And I think you may not say it's affecting you or you're not carrying out that, but you can just look around at your friends and you can see what they're up to.
Your knowledge of music culture is fantastic, if you ask me. So that's
yeah.
That's really good. Okay, so we established music as one possible or one reason. Yeah. What else would you say is an obstacle? Because I tell you why. Come Ramadan, people are able to pray quite regularly, but the lead up to it necessarily, it won't happen. What is it during that month that people think, you know what, I'm going to really kind of concentrate now? What sort of prevents them from keeping that focus throughout or afterwards, or even beforehand? Do you think? What, you know, is it the 5 times a day? Is it the fact that you have to get up very early in the morning? Us being in the northern hemisphere, for example, right? Even Ramadan can be difficult because of the length of the day. Okay, whereas other parts of the world, it's not so difficult. Sorry, I apologize. It's less difficult than it is for us. You know, I think that's my personal view. What do you think, you know, about that?
I don't think that the younger generation view Ramadan as a longevity kind of thing. They view it as, this is the month that I'm going to try my best, but they're not going to implement changes that are going to last. So they're going to try and do everything that they can in this month. Stop music, stop doing drugs, stop hanging out with their friends or doing anything haram. But straight after, when Eid hits, that's it, you're going to go straight back to being normal. They don't have the intention to make it last. And they're not making realistic changes. So for example, if my goal for Ramadan is to focus more on my daily prayers, that is a change that I can practically continue after Ramadan. But if now I am going to say, do you know what, I'm going to read all my sunnah prayer every single day, and that's it. So straight after Ramadan, that's not going to be practical for me. Definitely not going to be practical for me. So if I continue that after Ramadan, it's going to quickly fizzle out. And I think the younger generation needs to understand that Ramadan is about implementing changes that are going to continue with you for the rest of the year until you hit next Ramadan. And every Ramadan, inshallah, you'll improve.
I think that brings it back to the point about try and be consistent. Do something now. Try and embed it enough in the way you are that it continues after Ramadan as well, right? So that's a very good point. Just to bring in a couple of our speakers or learned colleagues who are out there, any kind of views or any help that you can provide from from this obstacle perspective, say for example music and the mindset change. What can not just the youth, but we as individuals do from a practical perspective to help us get the best out of Ramadan this year? Awesome, Umran. Nav, any of you brothers or guys want to have a quick stab at that one?
I think this is a very long road in terms of making changes. I think the first thing is people need to get into a mindset. Parents need to have a certain expectation, and the children also need to, or the youngsters also need to have a certain expectation about what's going to change in their lives. What Miss was talking about is true. There's a lot of youth that are out there and they literally enter Ramadan to, as I would say, suspend their sins until Eid hits, and then they'll just go back to it. And this is all about a mindset. This is the main issue here, okay? For decades, and even Harun, you know that as we were growing up, Ramadan has just been a massive, big culture for us. It's almost like what the Christians, how they treat, Christmas, right? The whole concept about going to the church and celebrating, and even Easter, whatever, it's always kind of diminishing. It's almost becoming like a habit. It's almost become like a staple part of your thing. And that's the problem. We're losing ground on that. And in order to make that change, there has to be effectively education, right? You need education, you need understanding. no one changes without ideas. No one changes without particular views that can challenge their constant views that they already got. Like I always say, you can't clean a dirty table with a dirty cloth because you're just going to pass from one dirt to the other. You've got to literally use something that can challenge the thoughts that you already have. So this requires a lot of conversation. So for example, for me and Misbah, or me and Abed, or for you or for your children, these dialogues have to open. We have to break those barriers. We have to break that, the status quo that used to happen before. I never used to have these conversations with my dad. I never used to have this conversation with my mum. It was just expected from us to go and fast. And therefore, we never really understood why we were doing it, and we would just suspend it. So for me, I think the main thing here is education. They need to understand. But it's the style of education, it's the approach. I mean, have you never ever thought for a second how everything in terms of education has gone to ebooks? And I was talking to a brother about this, and I was saying, it's amazing how you can't find any of the Islamic books actually on ebooks. Very, very few of them. It's because we're not moving through that we're not moving through that digitalization. We're not moving through the modern world. We're not utilizing what is, what we need to do to try and make that change. And I think that is one of the biggest problems. We need education, and we need a certain style of education to make that change.
Okay, thank you. Imran, now do you want to have a quick stab at this, or we've got plenty to talk about? So
Exactly. Yeah, mashallah, good. I think you kind of summed it up there. It's quite good. Again, just going to read a question from some from the audience. How do we tackle this problem with the younger generation, as in the 15-year-olds? Again, Asim, you kind of summed it up. But just to reiterate this comment here, consistent reminders. However, the reminders from seniors need to be in such a way that they actually relate to the youngsters. So we need to relate at their level. I think we've gone past that stage of listening to music and stuff, and some may still do. But I think it's slowly you remind the youngsters, and you need to try to relate in their language, in their way, in their form. Yes, you can't just pick up a stick and beat them, but it's got to be slow and subtle, and inshallah, make dua, and hopefully things will change over time. But yeah, you kind of summed it there, Asim.
Someone put a very good comment, actually, and I think it brings us quite nicely onto that. So we talked about music, but one of the comments put on here was that the music we listen to is associated with a circle of friends. So how important is that circle of friends that you keep before, during, after? Should they be the same? Should they always be the same kind of people, or does it matter how diverse? And when I say diverse, I don't necessarily mean Sikh, Muslim, Hindu, whatever. I'm talking about culturally and the kind of thing that they represent, those kind of circle of friends, the impact they have on you and your ability to be consistent and to focus and to be in the environment that you want. What are your kind of views on that?
I think it's a difficult one. I think especially at our age, everybody's at a different stage of their deen and their journey. I have some friends that are super religious and some friends that are on the opposite end of the spectrum. I think it's unfair to judge anyone. I think everybody's on their own journey, and everybody's been through different things. And we're fortunate enough, myself and Zayn and Adam, we're all fortunate enough to have parents that we can talk to and teach us in a way that is understandable. Whereas some children don't have that. They are, as you said, like taught with a stick, or they're taught from a cultural perspective, which isn't always explained to them, and they don't understand the reasoning behind it. So it's unfair to judge someone. And I think when we look at imams and some lecturers and some role models of our community, the way that they kind of have a little bit of a judgmental tone towards the younger generation kind of cuts them off and kind of alienates them. I think definitely there needs to be more of an understanding between the two, the relationship and the dynamic between the younger generation and the people that are trying to educate us. So I think friends is a very, very important thing. You should be surrounding yourself with people that you feel embarrassed to sit around, or you feel embarrassed to not pray on namaz, or everybody's saying, let's go pray, and you're the only one that's kind of not wanting to pray. But then again, I think you also have to take the responsibility to encourage other people, so people who are maybe not as religious as you, to kind of encourage them, come on, let's go read Jummah, we're at university, or let's go listen to a talk, or let's talk about the deen instead of talking rubbish. I think it's good to have a mix and a diverse group of friends who are all at different stages. And you never know, the person who's least religious today can be the most religious tomorrow. So I don't think it's fair to cut anybody off based on where they're at, but just make sure taking into consideration everybody's positives and negatives. If your one friend's a drug dealer, you don't want to be influenced by what he's doing. So yes, maybe he may change in a couple of months, a couple of years, but you just have to be aware of who you are, what your values are, and to make sure that it's very hard to say, try not to be influenced by other people, but have a balance of your friends with stronger iman and with weaker.
Yes, I mean, I don't want to state the obvious, but you're saying it's almost like you don't walk away from that kind of thing, or those kind of people, if they're your friends, you almost kind of try and bring them on the journey that you're going on. But sometimes that can be difficult, right? Because they're so ingrained in what they're doing. If you hang around with them even more, you become part of them, because it works the other way, right? So you've almost got to still be focused and hard-headed enough. But then I think that comes very well, you're right, Asim, back to the whole thing about education. That's where it begins. We're not only going to make it important, the relevant education, I think we've got to make it, relevant, but we've also got to make it interesting. If you're talking at such a high level about certain things that the kids can't relate to what's going on, you've got to be able to bring in the things of music and the culture that's happening out there. Not be afraid to talk about those things and discussing it with the youth, I think, so that you then bring them on the journey that you're going on.
I think there's been a few good points that have been made, right? And I'm just looking through the chat as well. Now, one of the points that were made was in regards to, parents having one mindset. If you don't have the right parents teaching you, or if you don't have the right friends teaching you. So there's a few things to understand from it. So let's try and bring the Islamic tone back into this conversation. Okay, so remember one thing, that first of all, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already set everyone's path. Okay. One thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not control, and has made it very clear what he will not control, is the thoughts that a human being carries and the action that he decides to take. What does happen is, outside of that sphere of influence, is after the action's been initiated, is the results of Allah. You decide you want to invest some money, you have that idea, you take you go to the bank, you take £100 out, and you go and you put that money in. Now, whatever happens to that money, whether that stock goes up or down, or whatever investment you put in goes up and down, is in the control of Allah. Everyone has responsibility. So we look from Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it very clear in the Quran that every individual has his own level of accountability. Some of us are fortunate that we have parents that might have the education of Islam. Some of us are unfortunate that our parents may not even be practicing, and some of us even in a worse situation. They could be orphans and not even have any parents. We could always look at many different excuses. And I think the mindset here is very important, because you have to understand that there is only one life that you have to live, and ultimately you're going to be tested upon that life. You can look at A, B, and C. You can look at whatever factors you want in life, and you can make excuses and say, they didn't teach me, he didn't do that, I didn't have the right company, I went to school full of Caucasian Christians, or atheists or agnostics, and therefore I never got the influence. We live in a very big world. We have the opportunity to learn. You make the choice to listen to music. You have the choice to make the friends that you have. You make the decisions about everything you do. Yes, there are elements of influence that could sway you in that direction, but ultimately you make that decision. And it's ironic with that idea is that though life around you, the peripherals in life around you help you or sway you into certain decisions, isn't that the same concept that Islam says that shaitan comes to whisper in your ear and encourages you to do wrong? Everyone will encourage you to do wrong, but ultimately you make the decision. But the problem we have here is that we are incapable of making the right decision, what is right and what is wrong. If Misma is put in a situation where somebody's turned around and giving her a spliff and says, you want to have a smoke of this, unless she has a previous conception that this is haram and this is wrong, etc., she can make that right choice. Okay, so remember one thing: Islam is not Islam is very a forgiving religion. You'll never be accountable for the things that you do not know, okay? But you still have to make that conscious effort of trying to learn and understand about Islam. You may not get Islam from your parents. Did Muhammad Sallam learn Islam from his parents?
No.
Never. He did not learn Islam. Yes, we can say the advantage was that he got the lesson from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then you look at the other Sahabi and some of the Sahabis who came into Islam, their parents, forget about teaching them, they were against them. Some of those parents tortured their own children because they didn't want them to become Muslims. Some of them locked them away, right? So you have to look at the circumstance. If you look at Islam from that perspective, you begin to realize that actually it's not necessarily the responsibility of parents. A parent has responsibility to you, but they don't necessarily have responsibility of teaching you the elements of Islam. You have responsibility to yourself. I have responsibility teaching Islam to my daughter, Misbah, for example. But if I don't do it, that doesn't mean that she's off scot-free. She still has responsibility to go and learn and try to understand. So I think few things here is that we all have to make our choices, and we have to make those choices wisely. But we have to use that. There's a certain part of our intelligence that we have to use, whether we have Islam or we don't, that gives us the ability to decide whether we should learn about Islam, teach ourselves, or find those people that can teach us about Islam. And that's really the key thing here, right? You can follow the crowd as you please, but ultimately you still have to remember the onus is upon you. You still have the accountability, and you still have that decision to make.
Yeah, very good point. Thank you. Anyone add anything, or Nav, guys?
Yeah, just a very quick point. So just need to drop off. But look, I absolutely agree, Asim. You kind of nailed it there, right? Look, at the end of the day, right? Just look at this. How much we expect a lot of our children to learn the Deen, don't be this, do this, pray, fast, etc., etc. But really, how much time do we actually spend sitting with our children? And I say this a lot, right? Do you spend 5 minutes a day, every single day, teaching your children about Islam, discussing any topics related to life in Islam? The answer is no. 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, even 10 minutes a week. Do we actually sit with the children as parents and talk about Islam? It doesn't happen. It does happen in some households, but the majority, you will find this doesn't happen. So look, at the end of the day, if we don't have the knowledge, the fundamental thing here is educate yourself. Asim said it, educate yourself. If we are lost and confused, our children are going to be lost and confused as well. So we need to learn the Deen ourselves. And alhamdulillah, there's lots of platforms. We have the Seerah class, and we have the other classes. We've got this going on, and lots of resources online. But learn yourself and teach the children as well. But don't just leave this Islamic education to the masjid. That's not enough. You've not done your duty. Inshallah, that's what I wanted to say.
And someone makes a very good point on the chat here as well, that this kind of education that we're talking about, it needs to start this developing our love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet, the Deen. Developing that should start at a young age. Just like we're happy to teach our kids these nursery rhymes and make sure they understand this and they can sing this song and they know all about this event and that whatever. It should start when they're 5, 6 years old, 7 years old, even up to 10, right? That kind of education, that kind of mindset starts at that age. I think that's a very good point. And I think the problem is we're all just focused on what do we do? Send them to the mosque. As long as they can read Quran in Arabic, if they don't understand, they can just read it, we're done. And that's not what it should be. Education even at that age can be comprehensive enough to help build that child's future attitude towards the Deen and the dunya. So that's a very good point. I just wanted to kind of bring out there.
Harun, just to add to that, and again, I'm not having a dig at anyone, right? But look, we see this all the time, okay? When it comes to the academic, you're right, from the beginning, we teach them all of these stories and these songs and everything, right, related to school, etc. But when it comes to Islam, there is a lack of it. But when it comes to the academic education for schools, etc., we spend a lot of money. Sometimes it is unlimited, right? We close our eyes and we just spend. on books and education, on tuition, etc. But when it comes to the deen, I've heard this so many times, and you come across this, right? That this masjid is charging £5 more now, or they've increased their rates to £2.50. You're only paying £5 a week or £10 a week, right? Or they've gone up by a couple of quid. Oh, why they're doing this? You start complaining, and that's a bad thing to do.
Look,
That's a bad thing.
Look, just a few points here, right? Because we're kind of coming to a close. Look, the parents have a certain sense of responsibility, okay, that they have to take. The children have a sense of responsibility. You're never going to have a perfect scenario, okay? You're not going to be in a situation. Unfortunately, there are some children, there are some youth who don't have parents who are educated in Islam, who have not been brought up in family. I know families in Slough, for example, who come from a generation of families that have never prayed, just haven't prayed or fasted, okay? They will go for their Jummahs and so forth. But I was surprised to see when I sit and I talk to these guys that they literally, they haven't prayed and they just don't fast because they've never been taught this. And when they see people do it, they're aiding to it. My point being here is that there's 2 points here. One is for the parents. I have spoken to parents, okay? And I've asked them about whether they have indulged in conversations with their children, sitting around a table when they're watching TV, looking at issues, looking at current affairs and issues where they can have a certain conversation where they can guide them and aid them with this common sense, the undertone being Islam. And shockingly, you'll be surprised at how many of the parents have no idea when it comes to the Islamic knowledge and the concepts of some of the very basic fundamentals. If a parent doesn't have a fundamental knowledge about Islam, what will you expect the children to pick up? We live in a society where we are predominantly dominated by a society which is kufr, right? Which is non-Islamic. That's 80–90%. So if you take the stats, you have a child, let's say a 15-year-old. In a normal working week, think about it. He spends from 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock when he comes back, a time at home, but he spends from literally 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning till about that 5 o'clock being outside, being influenced in that society from his schools, from his friends, from his teachers. Even when he comes out of school, when he comes home, what time is being spent between the child and the parent? What conversations are being had? The more time elapses, what's happening is the mindset of that child, of that youth, is being totally encouraged by what is being taught in society, because he has no other choice. A youth at the age between 12 and up to about the age of 19, 20 years old, they're at a very impressionable age. They are picking up these ideas from society. What are we doing to challenge this? When I have conversations with my children, I'm surprised the way that they're thinking about certain things. And I don't begin to realize I need to challenge this. I need to have this conversation. But then you find out that a lot of parents don't even have the knowledge. They don't have the fundamental knowledge about Islam. They barely know the 5 pillars. They don't know anything about the Prophet Muhammad, what he carried, what he did, what he achieved. And most of these domestic issues that we have are things that he dealt with. So there is a problem there. Now, if your parents aren't giving that, then what's going to happen? The child and the youth, they're going to come to a stage where they're going to have to learn and they're going to have to deal with these situations themselves. But as I think Misbah's made a point, and a lot of the people on the chat have made a point, what are they going to do? If they don't get this teaching, we cannot be judgmental upon these kids.
Absolutely.
Right? So the mindset has to change here as well from us. If I go out the street and I meet Misbah's friend or I meet a Bear's friend and they don't know nothing about Islam. I know, for example, one of my sons, their friends, doesn't pray. He's 17, 8 years old, 16, 17. He doesn't pray because he doesn't come from a family that teaches him how to pray. The family doesn't pray. What am I going to do? Try and say to him, this is disgusting, son. You can't be like this. That's ridiculous. You understand? So there's a way of embracing him. There's a way of embracing his intellect. There's a way of embracing his emotions and dealing with that. And I think that's the main thing that the point I wanted to make is we as parents, we are not just the parents of our own children. We are the parents of every youth Muslim that are out there. We will take the same example of what Muhammad Sallam had done. He took it upon himself to teach every single person, everyone that needed his help and aid and guidance. Even those who don't think they need guidance, we will be there to guide them.
Correct.
Understand? So we have to make that sacrifice as parents. I wouldn't even look at the kids. I would look at ourselves as adults first. What are we doing to input into our community? What are we doing to try and make that change in our community to help our kids? And that's a question that really needs to be looked at.
Jazakallah, very good point. And I think a very salient one as well. We're pretty close to the end now, and I think that's probably a good point to kind of end it on. Unless, Misbah, you want to discuss anything else, or we'll leave it till after tomorrow's discussion?
Yeah, no,
Can
we
I-
can leave it for.
Yeah, can I just suggest one thing, right? We've got people in the audience, we've got people on the chat group. Please send in topics, conversations. You know, we want to be able to deal with this. This is not just for Ramadan. This is, inshallah, we'll try something as well afterwards. We did do some programs with some local schools as well, where we wanted to do these little workshops, talking about drugs, talking about sex, talking about all of the issues, right? That currently affect the kids, and we wanted to try and bring these up. If there are any topics that you think are relevant, okay, I want Haroon and Misbah to lead those conversations. And by all means, if anyone wants to come in and really bring their points forward, inshallah, this is the open forum. As you know, that the plan is that every other day, you know, or a few days in a week, we're going to be just doing the talks, and these will be opened up for conversations.
There's some great points on there as well. I mean, absolutely, it's you know, we're awesome. Where are the alternatives, right? Who's going to provide those alternatives for these kids? That's us. And if we don't take up the baton on that, no one's going to do it. So hopefully, this will continue, you know, way past Ramadan, if we can keep it going and keep enough interest. But if not, we'll still be here. So Jazakallah everyone for attending. I think it's been very fruitful.